Some have wondered what the difference is between covenant theology and what we believe in. And what we believe in would be, we've used the term enlargement theology. That's not exactly going to be to relate to what we're talking about today. When it comes to the covenants and the way that we at TorahResource see the covenants, it's much more of what would be termed promise theology, which was put forth by Walter Kaiser. Now, Kaiser, for those who are aware of Kaiser and he's a fantastic scholar and a wonderful, just a wonderful human being in general. He's a lot of fun to talk to and listen to. With that said, Kaiser believes in something that we certainly reject called built-in obsolescence. I'll let my dad talk a little bit about that. So for now, I'm going to throw this question to my father. What is the difference between covenant theology and promise theology, which we believe in?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say that enlargement theology is, I think, an excellent term because it hits at the very heart of these different theologies. Let me start with covenant theology. Covenant theology came out of the Reformation, and it has as its central issue, what is Israel, or who is Israel? And it was beyond the scope of the reformers, Calvin, Luther, Zwingli, and some of the rest, to think that God was going to continue on with Israel in the future, because Israel had rejected Messiah Yeshua, and Israel wanted him crucified, and so forth and so on. And that, unfortunately, is not the case. It wasn't Israel as a nation, clearly. It was individuals within that nation. But nonetheless, if you read Isaiah and the prophets, Israel does not come out looking very well, except for a future prophecy when God would turn the heart of Israel, take the heart of stone out, and put the heart of flesh in. But the reformers said that just doesn't make sense. And the reformers, remember, had adopted an allegorical interpretation of the scriptures. So they said, God has moved from Israel to something brand new, which they termed as the church. So most of the reformers were pretty set on a replacement theology or supersessionism. Now, the question is, what do you do then with the eternal covenants that are made? When you read the covenants that made with Abraham, when you read the covenant that's made with Israel at Sinai, it says in chapter 31 of Exodus, it says that the Sabbath is the eternal sign of the covenant. It will always be. So what do you do when you have these covenants? How about the Davidic covenant? Okay, so you have this covenant made with David that there would never cease to be a descendant from his line sitting upon the throne. What do you do with that? Well, the reformers pretty much allegorized it and said, oh, that's now talking about the church. So this is where they came up with covenant theology. What they did was they took the historical covenants, and I don't believe there's a historical covenant made with Adam, but some would, and the reformers believe that. They believe there was an Adamic covenant, which they called the covenant of works. Now, why did they say that? Because it was given, as it were, to Adam and Eve, this idea. If you obey, you'll live forever. If you disobey, you'll die. So they took that as a covenant, but there's no covenant language there, okay? Then they postulated an eternal covenant between the members of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, that there was a covenant of redemption. And that covenant of redemption was a covenant that the Father made with the Son, and the Son accepted it, Yeshua accepted it, that he would come incarnate, that he would die, and he would secure redemption for those whom God had chosen. And the Spirit covenanted with this covenant of redemption to apply what Yeshua had done to those who would be saved. Okay, so that was the covenant of redemption. Then they lumped the covenant of the Abrahamic covenant and the Davidic covenant and the new covenant together as the covenant of grace. The covenant of grace was made between God and the elect, or those who would be saved. And so they took the historical covenants and made them into theological covenants, non-physical, non-historical, but beyond history, that is, in eternity. And so then they begin to take things from the physical covenants, the historical covenants, and apply them to the church. Where do you suppose paedo-baptism came from?
Right.
Baptizing a baby or a child. The Reformers taught, those who held to covenant theology, that because on the basis of circumcision, when a boy child was born in Israel and he was circumcised, did he become part of the covenant? Yes. How do we know that? Because it says one who is not circumcised will be cut off from the covenant. Okay. So they said, well, how does that apply now to the church and taking these historical covenants and making them into theological covenants or covenants of eternity? And they said, well, therefore, baptism replaces circumcision. And they took this from Colossians, where it says that you have been circumcised with the circumcision of the Messiah through baptism. I firmly believe they totally misunderstood or misrepresented or interpreted that text. But nonetheless, they said, okay, baptism. So what does baptism do for an infant? It brings him into the covenant of grace. But the covenant of grace is not affirmed in that person until they themselves affirm it by their statement of faith. And that's what the covenant theology churches would call confirmation. Okay? So that was essentially setting Israel aside, and they would say, no, Israel is done. Israel's been done away. The church is the new Israel. So now when you read those promises in Isaiah about the wonderful rebuilding of Jerusalem and the wonderful coming back of Zion and the beautiful things that God is going to do for Israel, it's really talking about the church.
Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button and check out more videos from Messiah Matters.